This is called a finger blaster. It's a foam rocket. It's got a rubber band, elastic band at the end, and it's great for games at youth. When you do this, you can fire it a great distance. It flies forward and it's fun to play games with. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment, you are a finger blaster. Imagine God comes along and he places you somewhere, and as he does, he starts pulling back on this rubber band. He starts filling this rubber band with potential energy. Everybody who is watching this video has potential from God. We are all blessed and given God-given potential. But sometimes that potential doesn't amount to anything. Sometimes we let go of the wrong end because we don't listen to God's instructions. Sometimes we are unsure of where we're meant to be aiming in order to hit the target. And sometimes we dawdle and don't fulfill our potential, and so we lose the potential energy. God has given us potential, but we have to choose to listen to it, and we need to choose to step into it. Welcome to our 4th week of How to Squander Your Potential. This January, we're exploring the ways in which we can waste, miss, or ignore our God-given potential. Just like a finger blaster, our potential can be lost unless we actually choose to step into it. We've been exploring the life of King Saul, the first king of Israel. This is somebody who had so much God-given potential, and yet he squandered it in so many ways. Now, just to be clear, we are looking at Saul's life as an example of what not to do. We're looking at his life so that we can avoid making the mistakes that Saul made. And if you've missed any of the sermons in this series, I would encourage you, go back, check out the podcasts on our website, check out our YouTube channel and watch some of these sermons. Make sure that you actually look at some of these ways that we can squander our potential. Now, so far in this series, we've explored 1 Samuel chapter 13, chapter 14, and chapter 15. Today we're going to skip a couple of chapters because we're going to go to 1 Samuel 18. So a little bit of context about what we are missing in those chapters. Last week we heard how Saul disobeyed God again. He chose to trust his own judgment over God's commands, and he didn't fulfill the mission God had given him. And God said because of that, once again, he was going to remove the kingship from Saul. It was the second time that Saul was told that that was going to happen. Samuel, the prophet, has then gone to the fields near Bethlehem, and God has directed him to the youngest son of a man named Jesse. And there, once Samuel found him, on God's command, God's orders, that youngest son was anointed. He's described as a man after God's own heart, and his name is David. Yes, David, that same David that you're thinking of, because sometime after he has been anointed, the young shepherd goes and he fights Goliath. He fights the Philistine giant. While delivering food to his brothers in the army, he saw that Goliath had tormented the Israelites for 40 days. So he marches up there and he does what Saul should have done. He trusts God to deliver Israel. Goliath is defeated. The army continues to wage war against the Philistines, and David is now conscripted into the army. He is enlisted into the army. And the Bible actually says that every mission that Saul sent him on, David achieved success. The men were happy with this, and they are currently on their way home from the war. Saul has made David a commander, And as they're on their way home, women are coming out of the towns to meet them. They're singing and dancing, and this is where we pick up our Bible reading for today. 1 Samuel 18 verses 7 to 9 say, "As they danced, they sang, 'Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands.' Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. 'They have credited David with tens of thousands,' he thought, 'but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?' And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David." So far, Saul has been incredibly impressed. He has been amazed with David. He has shown bravery. He has shown courage. He has shown trustworthiness. David has shown that he wants to serve Israel. David has demonstrated his ability time and time again, and Saul would have been loving this experience as king. Because as the king, Saul got the accolades, he got the attention, he got the credit for whatever the army was able to do. As king, he gets the boost to his reputation. But then something happens. They're on their way home and the women have come out and they are singing, and it's almost like there is this flash of realization in Saul's mind. There is this flash where he sees things in a slightly different way. And suddenly, Saul sees the popularity that David is getting amongst the people. And Saul becomes jealous. Now, I don't mean just a little bit jealous. I mean really jealous. Saul allowed jealousy to rule him. This is not just a case of you see something, you feel a little pang of jealousy and you think, that's stupid, and you ignore it. No, Saul falls into the mistake that he has made in the past, the mistake that has helped him to squander his potential in the past. Saul allows his emotions to control him. He has allowed fear to control him. He has allowed pride to control him, and now he is allowing jealousy to control him and to rule him. Saul allows himself to feed the jealousy. He nurtures it. He grows it. Verse 9 of our text points out that from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. This wasn't an encouraging eye. This wasn't a mentoring eye. This was a jealous eye. In the next two verses, and the very next day after our reading, Saul tries to kill David twice. That's what his jealousy has caused him to do. That's what his jealousy has led him to. And in fact, this jealousy, this desire to kill David, would become the defining feature of the rest of his life and his reign. Now, that's obvious that jealousy is so bad, but I don't think that when we get jealous, we're going to try and to kill the people that we're jealous of. So we have to actually understand why jealousy is bad. Even though jealousy can be confused for envy, they are actually different. Envy is when we look at what somebody else has and we want it for ourselves. Say, for example, you go out for a meal with your wife or with your partner. Their meal comes out first. You're going to look at their meal with envy because you're hungry and you want to have the meal. Now, jealousy is when something of ours has been taken by someone else. It's this protective feeling of our stuff. For example, if I'm out for a meal with my wife, and she steals one of the chips from my plate, that could lead me to feel jealous. She's taken something of mine. Why does she get one of my chips? She doesn't even have chips for me to steal. If she wanted chips, she should have just ordered chips. Now, the problem here, other than the fact that I really like my chips and I like to keep them myself, no, the real problem for jealousy is many circumstances what we think is ours is not really ours. And that's actually what we see in verse 8 of the text today. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands and me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? What more can he get but the kingdom? Saul is jealous. He is jealous that David is going to take the kingdom away from him. But Saul has forgotten, even though he is the king, he doesn't actually own the kingdom. And that's because jealousy is born when I mistake yours for mine. Saul's jealousy has led him to believe that as the king, Israel belongs to him. In actual fact, he is just a steward of something that God has blessed him with. God has allowed him to lead the nation here on earth. He has given him the potential to lead Israel well. But at the end of the day, God is the King of Kings. At the end of the day, God is the one who owns and has the ultimate authority over Israel. Saul was merely his steward, carrying out the day-to-day running of the country on behalf of God. Saul was allowed to lead by the grace of God. And I think at this point in our story, Saul is wondering if perhaps David is the one who would be taking the kingdom away from him. He knew God was going to anoint another king. God warned him twice, but he didn't know who it would be, and he didn't know when. And so he must wonder if this young shepherd who slew Goliath could possibly be the one who is going to take the kingdom away from him. It is important that we understand, though, and this is demonstrated by the many failures of Saul that are recorded before David even arrives on the scene. David didn't cause Saul's failure. David didn't steal the kingdom away from Saul. David did not take anything from Saul. Saul squandered his own potential. Saul lost the kingdom himself. Saul's choices and decisions are what caused God to remove the kingdom and to give it to David. Whenever we talk about jealousy, so often it comes about because we have mistakenly believed that we own something that we really don't. Now someone is trying to take it away from us. When you feel jealous over the amount of time that somebody is spending with a friend of yours, you do that because you feel that you have a right to spend time with that friend. When you feel jealous in a relationship, it is because you feel that you own time with that person. When you are jealous over what someone else at work or school has been able to achieve, you feel that they have taken a position. You feel that they have taken accolades or a reward that belongs to you. In reality, we don't own any of these things. We don't own anyone else's time. We don't have a right to certain accolades. And when we lose sight of that, we provide a place for jealousy to grow. James 1:17 reminds us, every good and perfect gift comes from above. Every good and perfect gift comes from God himself, and he has chosen to bless us with them. They come from him, and we are stewards of these gifts. Take a moment. Think about some of the good things in your life. Think of some of the blessings that you have in your life. Think about the gifts that you have been blessed with. What about the talents, the abilities that you have? What about your finances, your reputation, your family, your job? These blessings come from God, but they are gifts that he has given us to steward. God gives them to us, but he expects us, he wants us to do something with them. These blessings are so that we can achieve our God-given potential. Your gifts and your talents are for the purposes of God's kingdom. Your finances are to help demonstrate the love of Christ in this world. not for you to have the biggest and the greatest house so that you can show off to everybody else how great and awesome you are. Jesus shares a story in Matthew 25. We call it the parable of the talents. A rich man was going on a long trip, and so he gave his servants some money, different amounts to each servant. When he returned, he asked what they had done with it. What had they achieved with the potential that had been given to them? To those who had used their talent to increase the gift, the man gave them a greater responsibility. He gave them a greater reward. They were invited to have more. They received more potential. To the one who had merely buried it, the rich man was angry that he had squandered it. It hadn't been used in the way that it was meant to be used. He'd wasted the gift. These gifts, talents, and blessings that God pours out on us is not just to make our lives comfortable, to make them easy for us. God has blessed us so that we can bless others. God has blessed us so that we can expand the kingdom, so we can step into the potential, the good works that God has already prepared in advance for us to do. Now, jealousy is born when we mistake God's blessings for our own possessions. We are as stewards of these gifts. We're called to use them for His glory. Verse 7 and 8 and the beginning of verse 8 reveal another issue with jealousy. So let's read those verses again. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? Here we can see that jealousy forces competition. In the Message paraphrase, it actually says Saul took this song as a personal insult. He took it as a personal insult, but the thing is, it wasn't a personal insult. These women weren't insulting Saul. They weren't even putting David above Saul. And I know that there is a big difference between 1,000 and 10,000. But in Hebrew poetry, 1,000 and 10,000, they're used as a word pair. They're used to balance each other out. And in fact, they're just two fancy ways of saying a lot. These women were celebrating equally the incredible deeds of both their king Saul and the war hero David. They were saying, we consider both of you to be heroes. You have both saved Israel. But when Saul heard the song, with jealousy brewing in his heart, he immediately saw competition. In Saul's mind, it became Saul versus David. And when it is Saul versus David, he is losing. They've only credited me with thousands, but David has tens of thousands. If Saul had just stopped and if he had taken a breath, he might have realized. But Saul's jealousy forced him to think in terms of competition and rivals. That forced Saul to stop looking at the big picture, to stop looking at overall what was happening. David was achieving success against Israel's enemies. He was defeating Israel's enemies. He was successful every mission he went on. The Philistines were becoming scared of them. Israel was getting stronger. Saul was so blinded by seeing David as his rival that he missed the bigger picture. And in fact, when Saul was killed, the Philistines controlled as much of Israel's land as when Saul had first become king. Saul squandered the opportunities that he had. Allowing jealousy to control us like this is like a soccer team going out on the field Instead of focusing together on working together as a team, trying to score more goals than the other team. Every member of the team is running all over the field. They're chasing the ball in a giant huddle. Team members are tackling team members, and they're pushing each other out of the way just to control the ball themselves. In fact, even the goalkeeper, who's meant to be defending the goals, is up in the opponent's section trying to get the ball. Because in their mind and in their eyes, it is only a goal. It is only a success. It is only achieved if they are the ones to achieve it. It only matters if it's they who do it. This is chaos. This is the competitive and destructive nature of jealousy. Everyone is doing their own thing. Everyone is trying to win their own individual game, and there is no sense of a team working together to win. So let me ask you a question. How do you respond when somebody compares you? Maybe without even meaning to. Maybe it's a comment about how efficient the person is who is doing your old job. Maybe it's a comment about how close someone else is to the person you consider your best friend. Maybe it is a comment about how clean this other person's house is. You know that it is meant innocently, but your house is anything but clean. How do you respond? Is your first reaction to celebrate with them, or is it to cut them down? Do you support them, or do you compete? As Christians, we're told by Paul, we are all members of one body, one Lord, one faith, one Spirit, one baptism. We belong to the same team. We have the same goals, and when jealousy is introduced to that body, it wants to pull the unity apart. It wants to destroy the unity. It wants to claim the glory for itself because it thinks that it owns it. Saul's life warns us that is the way of squandered potential. And instead, the way of Christ is that we work as a team. We use the gifts that God has given us. Some people are up the front. Some are behind the scenes. Some are encouragers. Some are those who prepare the way. And some are those who are blessed enough to be able to harvest what other people have planted. But we use the gifts as a team. I remember being a younger leader at Camp Clayton. There were campers that I would see camp after camp. I'd have conversations with them about God. I'd share who God was. I'd share how he loved them, how he made them, how he knew them. I'd share about what Jesus did on the cross. I would plant seeds and I would water them time after time after time. And then at another camp later on, with another leader, I would see how that other leader led them to Christ. I remember being frustrated. Why did they get to do that? What about all the effort that I put in? What about all the time and effort and work that I put in for this person? That is jealousy. That is losing the big picture. That is focusing on competition and rivalry. And I'll be honest, I am ashamed of the way I allowed myself to act in those situations. I am ashamed of the way that I felt there because I made it all about me. I've since begun to understand I had the honor of preparing the way for others. I was part of the process, and it doesn't matter who gets to harvest. What matters is that there are more young people following Christ now than there ever have been before. God has given all of us gifts. He has blessed us with talents. He has blessed us with possessions. He calls us to steward those gifts. But he doesn't call us to steward our gifts as lone wolves. God has not set us up to be competing against one another. He doesn't call us to steward them as lone wolves. He doesn't want us competing against one another. He doesn't want this to be a survival of the fittest kind of thing. We are all members of one body. And that means that if we want to step into our potential, to step into who He has called us to be, then we need to work together. That means in order to fulfill our potential, we need to learn to be humble, to seek to feel not just ourselves, but we need to seek what is best in the kingdom of God. Even if that means that we don't get accolades, even if that means that we don't get noticed, even if that means that we don't get the attention for the work that we do. Because I wonder, what if Saul, knowing or suspecting that David was going to replace him, didn't allow jealousy to compete against him, didn't allow jealousy to block out David's potential? But instead, what if Saul used his position to grow David, to prepare him as a leader, to avoid Saul's mistakes and instead allow David to grow? Because what if our potential is not just to achieve great things ourselves? What if our potential is not just to push as far forward as we're able to ourselves, and we burn ourselves out in the process? What if our potential is to run forward, clearing the way behind us for the people who come after us? What if our potential is to provide a safe and solid platform, a foundation for those who come after us, so that they can achieve heights that we can only dream of? What if our potential is to be an example of people who continue to seek God deeper throughout their whole lives? That we continue to use our gifts and our talents, not just in the same ways, but in new ways for the kingdom of God. I am a father who prays for my daughters to know God deeper, to hear Him more clearly, to rest in His love and to respond to it so much more than I do. I don't use that as an excuse to stay where I am in my relationship with God, thinking, well, at least they're going to do better than me. I know that my God does amazing things, so I push myself to know God deeper, to fall more in love with Him, to hear His voice more and more, to tune Him in more and more. And I push and I strain and I want to do more because I want to set an example for my girls. My potential is that I can show them what it means to go deeper with God, and I can set them up and I can pray for them, for God to take them further than I can go myself. Now, there are pictures on the screen as I talk right now of our young people. They have the opportunity, these young people have had the opportunity to share with other young people who God is. They're not the only ones associated with our church who have had this opportunity. But they've had the chance to step into, to test, and to try, and to seek, and to learn who God has made them and gifted them to be. And they are only able to do that when we choose to step out of that space. When we choose to step aside. But we don't just step aside and do nothing. We don't just step aside and watch. We step aside and we look them in the eye and we say, do you want to have a go? We step aside and we encourage them. We speak into their lives and help them to see who God has called them to be. We step aside and we walk alongside them. We support them as they learn how to do it. Because what if maximizing your potential is realizing it is not all about you, And instead, it is all about us? What if maximizing your potential is what we can achieve for God's kingdom together? What if?